Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me this afternoon, we have Chen, Senior Research Analyst at DWS Group, as well as Marex, Senior Director of Index Research and Development. We're here to discuss the defining features of thematic investments and how to get exposure to them. Jason and Mark, it is great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. And Jason, I want to kick it off with you. What is a thematic investment, and what are the defining features that makes it thematic?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jill. Happy to be here. So thematic investing can be very broad in its nature. It can be applied to different investment vehicles, different ways to access different markets. But I think there are some commonalities that we view linking thematics to each other. And the first one I would say, if you think about like a sector fund, for example, a thematic isn't necessarily going to tie to a specific sector. It might be more narrow than one sector. It might be broader. It might extend across different industries as well. The second one, which I think is the most integral point on thematics, is we really think a thematic has to tie to a trend or mega trend that you can observe playing out in the real economy, right? And you kind of view the impact of these trends playing out in a very perhaps more obvious way, but thematic investing gives investors access to, let's call it, the value chain of investments or capital allocation that might benefit the most from this mega trend or trend playing out. So in that sense, there needs to be a trend or mega trend attached to it. And then finally, this one is a little bit, I think, more controversial point, but thematics by definition and trends should have a finite time frame, right? It could be a very long time frame. It could take multiple decades for something to play out. But practically speaking, if you think about the life cycle of a trend, it needs to have, as with any sort of economic cycle, it needs to have nascent stages, it needs to ramp up and then mature over time. And we view that in a very similar way for thematic investing and trends that underlie those thematics, which is that you have to view them as, you are getting in at a time where you think perhaps it is underappreciated. You're accessing a part of that value chain where perhaps there is the most opportunity to ramp up into that trend. And then eventually you have to evaluate, when is it that I realistically think that trend has perhaps run its course or has shifted in the way that it impacts the world?
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction to make, Jason. So what are some of the major trends or mega trends that you see playing out over the next few years, and how would an investor get exposure to some of these trends?
Yeah, so there are a ton of trends, but I will generally address, I think, some of the mega trends where it's kind of a broad categorization where a lot of the trends kind of fit into those groups, right? So the major mega trends that I think we observe, but also a lot of policymakers have observed as well and written quite extensively about, are climate change, global instability. Technology is a big focus point as well. And then I think shifting demographics is the final one. And I would add as well that a lot of these megatrends, they're not mutually exclusive. They interlink with each other, right? Demographics drive technology. Geopolitics is a reflection of things that are happening in the economy, and climate change is just underlying all of these considerations as well. Even technology, you have considerations for climate impact and carbon emissions. I think where we see a lot of the really interesting trends playing out right now is in the technology space, and specifically AI space. Mark is more the expert on this topic than I am. And then as well, I would say geopolitics is top of mind. If you look post-financial crisis, you see it's, we had decades of globalization and free trade. And really over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen a deglobalization. We've seen more onshoring of trade, more of a desire to perhaps be less reliant on potential adversarial countries, or have more of our domestic value chain be onshore and manageable. But yes, I think absolutely topical to this would be the topic of artificial intelligence and its broad reach in terms of technology.
Yeah. And Mark, let's bring you into the conversation here. Nasdaq AI and Big Data Index. Tell us about that index and ETF that's tracked by it, and what's the methodology behind it?
Sure. Thanks, Jill. And I think all that was spot on by Jason in terms of, how do you think about thematics in a way where you're trying to measure exposure, not using some traditional definition of what is a sector or what is a factor, but really looking at alternative data in many cases to try to define, exposure at a company level to an emerging trend or to an emerging technological trend like we've seen over the last couple of years with AI, in a way that is meaningful, and that is also forward-looking in some way, right? And so I think the Nasdaq Global AI and Big Data Index, which we launched all the way back in 2018, it's coming up on its 6th anniversary. Kind of developed it in partnership with DWSX trackers out in Europe, and it's now a $3 billion ETF. The ticker is XAIX. The tracks our index out in Europe. Just recently got a product launched in the US, also tracking that same index. I would say this is as cutting edge as it gets, because we are actually using AI in the form of natural language processing and machine learning that our in-house Nasdaq AI team developed to analyze patent filings, and we're looking at those patent filings across several dozen disruptive technologies that are relevant and emerging and impactful, and sort of picking out the handful of technologies that are requisites for AI, not just to sort of launch new products, but to evolve over the years. And we think that's really powerful. We see a lot of sort of forward-looking value to looking at things like R&D, like patent filings, and this index is a way of really capturing the spirit of that in a fully systematic, transparent way.
Right. And Mark, what about performance?
Yeah, so the performance story I think is really interesting with this, right? We've actually got a couple of different indexes in-house at Nasdaq that track the AI theme. Some of it is AI as a standalone. Some of it is AI kind of mixed in with robotics. But this index in particular, the Global AI and Big Data Index, is our best performer, especially if you look at sort of since the Gen AI trend really got going and kind of captured the popular imagination with the launch of Chat GPT in sort of the fall and early winter of 2022. Since end of October, this index is up about 100% on a total return basis through the end of July. That is about double what our other AI index has performed. And it's well ahead of certain major competitors, like the indexes outlined underlying the two major global X ETFs that track the theme, as well as the index underlying the iShares ETF. Those are up anywhere from 40 to 60 to 80%. So substantial outperformance that we've seen over the last couple of years. And for us, it really does all go back to the power of your methodology and index construction.
Right. And Jason, why does investing in them yield the potential for investment returns? Where would these be appropriate within an investor portfolio?
Yeah, so I think a lot of investors nowadays think about kind of a core satellite approach where the core is meant to be that very long term. And I think ultimately my answer to your question ties into that time frame question, that time frame point that I made before, right? The thematic is intended to be a part of the portfolio and call it a intermediate period of time. And a big part of the reason why you're investing in that is because you believe that your earlier stages in that trend playing out. And so I think in terms of the potential returns that investors can think about, it's really about what they think the time frame is for the trend playing out. Do they think it's early, or do they think it's already played out? Do they think that also, in terms of what Mark was mentioning in the methodology and the approach to accessing that theme, is it the best or most appropriate way to do so? Where is the most potential upside or operating leverage to that theme? So I think those questions underlie how to think about the opportunity set. But in general, I do think that investors tend to think about it more so as a means of, call it, quasi-strategic potential return that's perhaps a little bit differentiated from like a broad market-based investment.
All right, gentlemen, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.